Is it live now?
Yeah,
Let's check.
yeah, we are live.
Okay, so shall we start? Okay.
I think we are already live.
Yes, sir. Good evening, one and all present here. Wishing a very happy Pride Day of the Pride Month. Today, we have a star speaker with us. He is none other than Dr. Nilabri Ranjan Chatterjee, the professor, the Department of English, Kalyani University. He is a sound scholar who is going to enlighten us with his views on Pride Month. He has been the recipient of Fulbright Scholarship at Austin and British Council Charles Wallace Fellowship at Downing College, University of Cambridge. He has contributed to scholarly works like The Muffled Heart, Stories of Disempowered Male, published by Rupa in 2005 as a co-editor. He has co-edited with late Tutun Mukherjee, Nari Bhav and Rojini and Female Impersonalities in India in 2016. In 2019, he debuted as a novelist with The Scholar. He runs the Facebook group called New Gender Studies, and he has his own YouTube channel where he delivers various concepts of literature. Last but not the least, he has pioneered new gender studies in India. Let's have him with a round of applause. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Anuradha, for that very kind introduction. But of course, it is inaccurate to say that I pioneered new gender studies in India. I did no such thing. There were campuses across India and even in West Bengal where new gender studies was being taught before me. Jadavpur University started their queer theory course, if I'm not mistaken, in 2005. So, by no stretch of the imagination am I a pioneer. But thank you so much, Anuradha, and greetings to everybody of the group Fun Ki Baat. And thank you so much for inviting me to talk today about pride. Um, so this is going to be much more like a run through the history of pride, and why was pride necessary at all? I mean, why did it have to happen in the first place? Now, obviously, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the way in which homosexuality was regarded in ancient India, or the way in which it was regarded in ancient Greece. Many of you already know that. So, if you have any questions regarding that, I can perhaps talk about it later at some point. But that is not something that I'm going to spend too much time talking about. What I wish to do, though, is I'm simply going to start off by saying that homosexuality begins to be regarded as a sin, and it becomes criminalized, and it becomes pathologized. Sometime around the pathology, I think, happens a little later, but certainly homosexuality begins to be regarded as a sin primarily. That is where it begins. From if you're looking for dates, if you like dates, not the edible kind, but the historical kind. If you like dates, then I have got some dates for you. The first date, of course, is 1532. And in 1532, what happens is that, across the Holy Roman Empire, yes, you have homosexuality being declared a sin. Now, what we really have to understand is that since the Holy Roman Empire is both two things at the same time, it is a religious kind of power. It is a religious structure, but it is also a political structure, right? So therefore, when you declare homosexuality as a sin, it also automatically becomes a crime. That is something that I think you would need to keep in mind, is that it becomes a sin and a crime at almost the same time. Now, for those of us who are, in India, we should be much, much more interested in another date, which is 1533. Now, what happens in 1533 is that you have Henry VIII, yes, he of the six wives. Henry VIII actually criminalizes homosexuality. So not only was Henry VIII famous for divorcing women and cutting off women's heads if they were his wives, and also for ordering men and women to be burnt at the stake, as indeed he did with Anne Askew and several other people. He is also to be credited with basically signing into law the criminalization of homosexuality, Henry VIII. So that is where it actually begins. Now, by the time we come to the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, she adds to the homophobia of this particular law, and she makes it even more, she makes life even more difficult for homosexual men. Mind you, that these legislations that were being enacted, they were almost exclusively targeted at men. They were not targeted at women. So it was primarily the men who were at the receiving end of these homophobic legislations. Yeah. And so therefore 1533 is the date that I mentioned. I am going to skip several centuries. Well, actually, I'm going to skip about about 2 centuries, to be honest. And I'm going to come to the end of the 18th century. So I'm going to come to the year 1785. Yeah. The reason why I'm going to come to 1785, this is actually rather interesting, because many of you are familiar with the name of Jeremy Bentham. Yes, utilitarianism. So therefore, those of you who are familiar with the name of Jeremy Bentham, you would be interested to know that as early as 1785, Jeremy Bentham was already writing against the criminalization of homosexuality. See, you didn't know that. So Jeremy Bentham, although this particular treatise that he wrote, but it's not quite a treatise. I mean, it's like an essay, yes, on pederasty. That was the name that was current in those days. This particular essay was not published in his lifetime. It was not published in his lifetime. It was only published in its full form, sometime in 1975. So much, much later in the day was it published in full form. It is, I think, available on the internet, but if it isn't, there must be some other way in which you can get it. Now, this essay is very interesting. Now, the reason why it is interesting is not just because it was written in 1785, but it is interesting because of the arguments in it. So maybe I'm going to spend a little time talking about exactly what is it that Jeremy Bentham writes in there. He mentions a lot of things, but what actually catches your eye is the part where he says that he finds homosexuality disgusting. Yeah, he says that I find it disgusting. I don't like that idea. It's a horrible thing. And just when people are going to cheer that, okay, wonderful, here is somebody who really, really is disgusted by homosexuality, he says, yes, 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 I find homosexuality absolutely disgusting, but that does not make it wrong. See, that is where he actually plays with the expectations of people. He says that just because I don't like something does not automatically make it wrong. This is where he does something which I think is remarkable, because I wasn't aware that even in the 18th century, people were talking about this particular personality like this. The personality that I'm referring to is King James the First and Sixth of Scotland, the man who succeeded Elizabeth I when she died. Now, King James I, those of you who are students of English literature will already know about King James. especially from your reading of Macbeth, because James was very, very interested in witchcraft. You know all of that. What you perhaps do not know is that James was also a homosexual man. Yes, he had several young men, good-looking young men, as his companions. But the two most famous companions of of James were Robert Carr, and then much, much more famous, Henry Wriothesley, who became the what I'm really looking at, the Duke of Buckingham, George Villiers, sorry, not Henry Wriothesley, George Villiers. So George Villiers became James's major favorite. So even during the lifetime of King James, people were already aware of the fact that the king likes men. Yes, but funnily enough, this is something that we are not told in our classrooms when we are taught Macbeth. Yes. Anyway, be that as it may, why did King James appear in this essay by Jeremy Bentham? King James appeared because Jeremy Bentham said that, he finds it ridiculous that just because I don't like something, I'm automatically going to decide that this is wrong or this is, sinful or this is a crime. That's a terrible thing to say, because King James also published this huge kind of pamphlet, as it were, condemning tobacco. He hated tobacco. Yes, he hated smoking. So he published this treatise on smoking, against smoking, as it were, anonymously. Nobody took much notice, and then he said, "Okay, nobody's noticing it." So then he published it again under his own name, and then everybody woke up and they said, "Oh my God, it is the king! It is the king who is writing against smoking." And Jeremy Bentham says, "Well, just as I find that to be ridiculous, that he is writing this treatise on smoking just because he doesn't like smoking. Similarly, if that were to be the case, if that is the way in which we are going to function, then, condemning homosexuality is something for which the king himself would have suffered had he not been the king." So clearly, Jeremy Bentham himself knew about King James's sexuality. And in 2021, we still don't know that King James was homosexual, but, well, at least bisexual. Let's put it that way, because he did have tons and tons of children. But he definitely, the marriage with Anne of Denmark, his wife, was it was a very productive marriage. It was a very reproductive marriage. But I don't think there was any affection there. His affections were absolutely with the men. So be that as it may, Jeremy Bentham makes the first attempt, as it were, first recorded attempt in modern times to defend homosexuality and to condemn its criminalization. This is happening in 1785. Now, when we come to the 1800s, and when we come towards the end of the 1800s, this is when, again, something very interesting begins to happen. Not even the end, I think towards the middle of the 1800s. Two things that I would want to mention. First is that you have a man called Walt Whitman, who is writing poetry in America. And the second thing is that you have British men in England who are reading Walt Whitman's poetry. Now, that in itself may not have much great significance, except for the fact that in many of Walt Whitman's poems in Leaves of Grass, and if you ask me exactly what these poems are, I'm going to give you the names of them later. But in many of Walt Whitman's poems, it is very, very clear that he is talking about the love that exists between two men. In fact, in one of his poems, he actually uses the phrase, "my friend, my lover," right? So therefore, he is very clear about the sexual, romantic relationships between men. Remember, this is in Leaves of Grass. The reason why Leaves of Grass also became very controversial, a lot of people didn't want to read it because apparently it was so much about sex. Now, across the pond in England, people were reading Walt Whitman's poetry and they were completely blown over, especially the homosexual men in England. They were completely blown over because they had never read anything like this before. So some homosexual men took had the courage, as it were, to write to Walt Whitman, basically to say thank you for writing this book of poems because we love it, because our kind of love is not talked about, and here you are writing about it. So thank you very much. Now, what really begins to happen is that Walt Whitman, on receiving these letters, he gets very, very angry. He gets very upset and he says, "Oh, that is disgusting that you are actually saying that, my poems are about, sort of dirty stuff like this. What nonsense is this? Of course, my poems are not about homosexuality at all. I will have you know that I have fathered plenty of illegitimate children." Well, after all this time and after a lot of research that has been done by hundreds of American academics, not one illegitimate child of Walt Whitman has been unearthed. So we don't know. So I would certainly dismiss what Walt Whitman said as a lie. He certainly did not father any illegitimate children, right? He didn't. He was lying. And the reason why he was lying is, again, because he had to defend himself against these rumors of homosexuality that were wafting across to America from the shores of England. Now, among the people who were actually writing to Walt Whitman at this time, there are two that I would want to mention. One is John Addington Symonds, married, homosexual, a great authority on Renaissance art, one of the first, I think, to translate the sonnets of Michelangelo into English. Many of those sonnets, you will know, were written to Tommaso di Cavalieri, this young boy that Michelangelo fell in love with. So John Addington Symonds was one. And also among Walt Whitman's devotees was somebody called Edward Carpenter. Now, people like Edward Carpenter, people like John Addington Symonds, they were already beginning to write about homosexuality. Of course, they weren't using that name then, it was called something else. There were all kinds of crazy names that were being sort of invented, Uranians and earrings and earrings and earnings and all of that. They were trying very hard to come up with a new word to describe men being sexually attracted to men. Homosexual as a term was not quite. I mean, it was there in circulation, as Michel Foucault will tell you, since the 1870s, but it hadn't percolated down to common usage. That was still not happening. But anyway, what is important is that we are looking at a small but fairly powerful literature that is slowly beginning to form around the end of the 19th century that is actually talking about decriminalizing homosexuality. Now, something happens in the 1870s. What happens in the 1870s is that you are looking at a change of law in Victorian period. What the change of law is doing is that it is, so in the 1870s, what is happening is that death penalty is being abolished for homosexuality. Imagine. So till the middle or late 19th century, a man could be condemned to death because, excuse me, I'll just have to, there's somebody knocking at the door. I'll be back in a minute. Yeah. So what is really happening is that in the 19th century, homosexuality is no longer an offense that is punishable by death. So the death penalty is being abolished, but it is being replaced by something which is not quite an improvement. I mean, obviously, now men don't have to die for having sex with other men, but now it becomes easier to imprison homosexual men. And that is because of the Gross Indecency Act. And Gross Indecency Act is basically that I can arrest anybody, if I suspect them of indecency. Now, indecency, as you can well imagine, is a very loose term. I mean, what is indecent to me may not be indecent to you. But there was a public consensus as to what this indecency basically meant. Indecency meant, men having sex with men. That was the only decent indecency that was apparently there. Every other kind of thing was decent. This was the one indecent thing that the Victorians had managed to light upon: men having sex with men. Mind you, lesbians do not exist. Yeah. So in Victorian legislation, lesbians do not exist. Now, the reason why lesbians are not a part of this particular Gross Indecency Act is because of it's not because the Victorians, loved lesbians. No. It was basically because, you see, the Victorian idea of sex involved the penis, right? So therefore, if there is one penis, sex. If there are two penises, a lot of sex. But if there is no penis, no sex. Because what are people going to do if they don't have a penis? You can't have sex without a penis. So do you see, due to this extremely, dare I say it, phallocentric understanding of sex, lesbians never did come into the homophobic legislation in England, right? And what really happens is that in India, we inherit. That is why I was trying to draw this long sort of line from Henry VIII. Is in India we inherit that law as Section 377, right? So therefore, in India, we got Victorian morality, Victorian sexual morality. We got it in 1861. And we have had it lovingly in our penal code till it was finally read down. I'm saying finally because it was read down first on 2nd of July 2009 in the Delhi High Court, but it was finally read down on 6th of September 2018 by the Supreme Court. So therefore, but I'm getting ahead now. Let me go further back. Let me go to the 1950s. Let me go to 1950s America. Now, in 1950s America, what is beginning to happen is that there are organizations that are slowly beginning to form of homosexual men and of lesbians, but primarily homosexual men. And the most famous such society, the most famous in the sense that it is recorded most often in sort of queer history, is this organization called Mattachine Society. Now, the Mattachine Society was primarily the work of somebody called Frank Kameny, Kameny. Now, what Frank Kameny did and what Mattachine Society did is that they very interestingly drew from the way in which the Black civil rights movement was gradually taking shape. I think this is something that you have to keep in mind. So what is it that the Black civil rights movement was doing? Well, let me tell you that when the Black civil rights movement actually began to take shape, the leaders of that movement, what they said to the people who would be marching with them, there would be these demonstrations. And what the leaders of these movements said is that if you're going to come and march with us, then you will have to dress, mark the words, you will have to dress as if you are going to church. You will have to dress as if you're going to church. So therefore, why was this very peculiar, dictum given? It was because black people at that time wanted to be regarded as good, law abiding, respectable people. You see, so therefore, there is a kind of an assimilationist logic that is working over here. The assimilationist logic, which is to say that, please don't beat us up. Please don't drag us out of our homes and beat us up and kill us and then hang our bodies from trees. Don't do that, because we are, again, just like you. We are law abiding, tax paying, respectful, respectable, God fearing, church going people. The slight matter of the skin color, if you ignore it, we are like you. And what the early homosexual rights movement did was they very much adopted this style of politics, assimilationist. So therefore, people like Frank Kameny, people of the Mattachine Society, they would go out for their demonstrations, and they would go out into the public wearing, double-breasted suits, wearing ties, wearing a hat, carrying a stick. So the whole idea was that, look at us, we are respectable. Look at us, we are respectable. Now, what these Mattachine Society men were doing is that they were very much an organization only of homosexual men. So what did the women do? Well, the women, they decided that, you are not going to take us in, so we will have to form our own society. So they set up their own society called Daughters of Bilitis. Now, Daughters of Bilitis, they set it up. So this became a lesbian organization, right? I think we still have one or two kind of women members of the Daughters of Bilitis who are still alive, I think, maybe one or two. So there you have it. So therefore, there was this sort of separatism that was going there. Homosexual men belong to their own organization, the lesbians belong to their own organizations, and ne'er did the twain meet. Until something happened today, 28th of June in 1969. What was that? Well, what actually was happening is that in New York, on Christopher Street, they had a very dingy, rundown, squalid little bar called the Stonewall Inn. Now, the Stonewall Inn was a place where, liquor off license, illegal, liquor could be consumed. And it was owned, the politics and the history of it is very, very messy. It was owned by the mafia. It was owned by the New York mafia. So clearly it was owned not by terribly respectable people. But who cares for respectability, right? So at this Stonewall Inn, what happened was that you had homosexual men, you had trans persons, trans men, trans women, you had lesbians who were all regular customers of Stonewall Inn. Now, Stonewall Inn was also the favorite target for the New York police. Literally, every time the police was bored, they thought, oh, you know what? I'm bored. Let's go and raid the Stonewall Inn. Let's beat up those faggots. Let's beat up those queers, right? So therefore, let's beat up those homos. So therefore, every time the New York police was a little bored, literally, they would go and stage a raid at the Stonewall Inn. Now, the Stonewall Inn, they had arrangements inside where men could dance with men and women could dance with women, and men could dress as women could dress as men. And every time these kind of cross-dressed people were found, the police had a very peculiar rule. I think the rule was that you had to be wearing three items of gender conforming clothing. Yeah, three items. So you had to be wearing three things that, if you are a man, are associated with men. And then you can wear other things as well, but three items of clothing that are gender appropriate. So these kind of cross dressers, yeah, the trans women, the trans men, the drag queens, the drag kings, they would all be there. And every time a police raid happened, what would really happen is that there would be somebody posted outside, and they would relay the message inside, oh, the police are coming. And immediately, the same sex couples, men dancing with men, women dancing with women, they would immediately break off and pair off with a person of the opposite sex. Yeah. So the police would come in and they'd say, "Oh, well, this looks fairly okay, except for the fact that those who were cis gay men or those who were cis lesbians, they perhaps did not feel the full force of the New York law. Who did feel the full force of the New York law were the trans persons. So therefore, the police would behave appallingly badly with the trans women, with the trans men. And invariably, they would be taken to the police station, they'd be harassed, they'd be humiliated. We know all of that. And then something happened today in 1969. This was a very hot June day, and it can get extremely hot in New York. You think it's hot in Kolkata. It can get awfully hot in New York. Yeah. And people were inside the Stonewall Inn and they were drinking. And it was an incredibly sad day for them, because a huge icon of the gay community, of the homosexual community, the actress Judy Garland, she had died, and 28th of June was her funeral. So you can imagine that it was a desperately sad day. And they were sitting there drinking, drowning their sorrows, and a raid happened. Now, all this time when the raid happened, the people would try to run away, they would try to disguise themselves. Not today. Something strange happened. They fought back. So what really happened was that the police were completely taken by surprise when these people, big burly men in skirts and in gowns, they started to give the police a black eye. Bricks were lobbed at the police vans. It was just complete chaos. The police were not expecting this. They were not expecting that these people whom we have been so easily harassing for years and years and years can turn around. They can protest. And it isn't going to be the protest of, I'm going to hand a rose to you. It'll be blows. It'll be violence. 3 days of rioting happened. Respectable New York society woke up in the morning to read banner headlines in their newspapers. Who are these people? Where were they all this time? Where do they come from? Well, they are there in your family, only you didn't know them. So what really happens then is that after 3 nights of rioting, there is something which binds everybody together. The separations that were there in the 1950s, that separation disappears, because suddenly people believe, what? We have been fighting amongst each other. Bad idea. I think we have a bigger enemy to fight. So magically, gay men, lesbians, trans persons, they all got together and they became a very powerful united force. Also, the feminists joined because the feminists suddenly realized, oh, hang on a minute. These people are fighting against the same people that we are fighting against. Our fight is against patriarchy. Well, their fight is against patriarchy too. So then, feminists who had all this time been considering lesbians as not being worthy of inclusion into their movement suddenly decide that yes, indeed, we are going to be in this together. We are all going to fight this fight together because our common enemy is patriarchy. As a result of which, the first Pride March, to say that, to call it so, actually took place in 1970. And because the Stonewall riots took place in June, June therefore becomes Pride Month. Now, what we really have to understand is that initially, when these pride walks were happening, it was basically gays and lesbians. Yeah. So initially, it was gays and lesbians. By the 1970s, you began to have one or two campuses in America, one or two, perhaps literature department. I think it was probably literature departments, no other department. Literature department. We are horrible people, we literature people. Yes, we do stuff that no other department wants to do. We rush in where angels fear to tread. So these literature departments, one or two, began to sprout across US, where they began to offer courses in gay and lesbian literature, gay and lesbian history. Heavens knows they had a lot to choose from. Walt Whitman, Emily Dickinson, Hart Crane, even Nathaniel Hawthorne. Yeah, the list was endless. So therefore, if you look at American literature, it's pretty much LGBT American literature. So they had a wonderful time designing these courses. And gradually what began to happen is that LGBT gradually began to form out of G and L. So what used to be gay and lesbian became gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. Q, however, had not yet been added. That is a much later addition. That actually begins to happen around the 1990s. Queer theory, the way in which we refer to queer theory right now, we actually have a date for it. It is actually 1991, which is when queer theory as a theory was, for the want of a better word, born. Yes, and the queer theory was born out of the pen of somebody called Teresa de Lauretis. And of course, this is happening in 1991, but already in 1990, Judith Butler publishes, her what has effectively now become the Bible of queer theory, which is Gender Trouble. Many of you may have already watched the 9 videos on gender trouble that I have on my YouTube channel. So queer comes into the picture much, much later. And the reason why queer comes into the picture much later is because by the 1990s, there is a real acknowledgement that LGBT is not inclusive enough. LGBT is not inclusive enough because how do you classify the person who may sexually be heterosexual, straight, but is constantly questioning heteronormativity? Somebody who is constantly living and practicing, anti-heteronormative, sort of acts. How do you characterize them? How do you bring in everybody who opposes heteronormativity under one umbrella? Queer. Because as you very well know, queer as a term its origin is a German term, also pronounced queer, which means at a slant. It's a slant. It's not straight, it's not opposite, it's a slant. So therefore, queerness becomes a political position which is at an angle to power. At an angle to power. Yeah. So therefore, anybody who identifies as queer need not necessarily be gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender. Queer then, by the time we come to the 1990s, effectively becomes a politics. So just as you can be a communist, you can be queer too. It has got nothing whatsoever to do with who you wish to sleep with. Nothing. Yeah. I was very amused recently when I had to speak to some young people. They come from various universities and colleges from West Bengal. And there were some people who were saying, well, I don't belong to the LGBT community, but I'm here, to understand their troubles. And I said, well, I corrected them and I said that, it is all very well for you to think that you do not belong to the LGBT community. But when you're saying you don't belong to the LGBT community, you're probably forgetting the B, which stands for bisexual. Yes? So if somebody is bisexual, they're also half straight. So if they're half straight, they're half like you. If they're half like you, you are half like them. So you are like them. So whether you like it or not, you are a little bit, a part of the LGBT community. So please don't say, I don't belong to the LGBT community. We all belong to the LGBT community, whether we like it or not, because of bisexuality. In bisexuality is heterosexuality. Come on. Come on. And also, I think when people say, I don't belong to the LGBT community, or when they say, I'm heterosexual or I'm homosexual, somehow there is this notion that my sexuality is permanent, it is stable. Yeah, and I'm actually going to stop very soon. I've been speaking for about 42 minutes now. So maybe in the next 2 or 3 minutes, I'm going to stop after I have told you that this is the thing. James Baldwin, one of my favorite American writers, James Baldwin, he had once said, it is silly to go through life knowing who you're going to fall in love with. You don't know who you're going to fall in love with. So if you don't know who you're going to fall in love with, you do not know the gender of the person you're going to fall in love with. You do not know the sexuality of the person that you're going to fall in love with. So come on, wake up. You can fall in love with anyone. So potentially, we are all LGBT, whether we like it or not. If we just remember this, I think it is going to become much easier for us not to say, yeah, I want to understand their trouble. Oh, come on. You have your own troubles too. You remember the time when your parents did not want you to date so and so person? You remember the time when your parents did not want you to marry so and so person? How do you think you felt at that time? You felt devastated. You felt that the world was against you. Aha, that is the way in which the majority of LGBT people feel too. Please try and access the deprivation that patriarchy has given to you. And once you have accessed it, use that access to connect to everybody who feels deprived by patriarchy. Let us all celebrate the Pride Month or whatever is left of it. Let us understand that whether we like it or not, whether we acknowledge it or not, whether we believe it or not, We are all in this together. Happy Pride. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was such a nice and an eye-opening kind of session. Extremely happy to have you here. And there are some questions, obviously. I will get back to them. Before that, I want to just ask one thing that I have on my mind. Quite a few days back, I was actually listening to one of your observations on your YouTube channel. So you were talking about like there was a newspaper column where they claim that the introduction of a daughter or a stable partner could make James Bond a human or more humane. So I was quite like the season was quite an eye opener to me, and I was blown away by your explanation. I would like to know more about it because I think people, those who have not yet listened to that talk, can get a sense of it, can get a smell of it. So please go ahead, sir. Please say something about it.
I think it would be a much better idea for them to actually go to my channel and watch that video on James Bond. I thought that that editorial in the Telegraph was absolutely preposterous. I mean, I don't know who was writing that editorial. I don't know what that person was smoking, but it was just the most preposterous thing. What they basically said is that, oh, I think it's time for James Bond to settle down. It's time that অনেক তো হলো, অনেক মেয়েদের সঙ্গে এদিক ওদিক কেন? একটা বিয়ে করুন. And this is the Telegraph, for heaven's sake. But this is the first time that Telegraph was speaking like some of my aunts. I had never known that an English newspaper would have the voice of my aunts, but that is the kind of voice that they had. এবার একটা বিয়ে কর. So therefore, Telegraph was asking James Bond to get married. What is interesting is that they said that it would make James Bond more humane. What is interesting in that assumption is that if you aren't married and if you don't have children, you're basically a serial killer. কেননা যারা বিয়ে থা করে না, রামপ্রসাদ, তুমি বোধহয় দেখেছো যে যারা বিয়ে থা করে না তারা সবাই লোকজনকে খুন করে বেড়ায়, তাই তো?
এক্স্যাক্টলি, ওটাই ওদের বিলিফ, ওটাই ওরা বিশ্বাস করে।
হ্যাঁ, সো বিয়ে তো করতে হবে, বিকজ দ্য মোমেন্ট ইউ গেট ম্যারিড, আই এম শিওর the moment you get married, you are clothed in this sort of halo of divinity, and you become semi-divine, right? So therefore, I just thought it was ludicrous, and the fact that Telegraph was printing such a stupid, brainless editorial, I thought was extraordinary. So yeah, but I mean, if you want details, you can go and check out my video.
Definitely, sir. People can check out your videos. And another one that I want to ask you is how deep-rooted this patriarchy is that you have actually spoken in one of your talks. So please, could you elaborate about this? Like we have seen there are multiple layers of patriarchy that work actually in our society. So could you please elaborate this? Because I was quite a few days back, I was reading a novel by Amruta Patil. It's called Kari. It's a graphic novel. And there was, yes, sir, there was a panel when Kari was actually going to have a haircut. So she went to a barber shop and she asked the barber, could you please cut my hair short? The barber replied to her, because you are looking like a man, looking like a woman, how come you come forward with a question that could you please cut my hair short? So that was a thing. He earns probably 100 or 150 rupees per day, and he has no idea about this patriarchal thing, this heterosexual thing, but he knows exactly well how to encounter it, how to say no. You are a woman, you cannot cut your hair short. So could you please elaborate something about this?
I think you basically answered your own question. You don't need my elaboration, but I would simply
No, sir.
say that this particular idea that somehow patriarchy is something that only well-read people understand is patently nonsense. I find it very strange when people have gender sensitization workshops. I find that title absolutely preposterous, because the gender sensitization workshops, honey, we don't need gender sensitization workshops, because right from the time we are born, we are gender sensitized. You're a boy, you're a girl. You dress like this, you dress like that. You don't go here, you don't go there. Gender sensitization is something that is drummed into us from the time we are born. What we really need is for us to be sensitized to gender diversity. That is what we need. Somebody has recently asked me to speak on gender sensitization, and I told them that, I hope you are choosing the right person. Because if you ask me to go to your gender sensitization workshop and tell, মেয়েরা হচ্ছে মায়ের জাত, আপনারা তাদের পুজো করুন, that is something that you're not going to get from me. Because I will not say that horribly patriarchal thing, respect women. I do not want anybody to respect women. I want everybody to treat women as their friend. Please don't respect women. Because in patriarchy, respect means insult. Don't respect women. Share your jokes with women. Share your dirty jokes with women. Research has proven that women have a sense of humor. Medical research has proven that women can laugh too. Doctors have told me, নীলাজ বাবু মহিলারাও হাসতে পারেন। আমি বললাম, ও আচ্ছা তাই নাকি, দারুণ তো। So doctors have told me that women are capable of laughing. So women have a sense of humor, women can laugh. Share your dirty jokes with women. Don't respect women, because your respect is actually insulting women. Please know the difference. So what we really have to understand is that patriarchy has also managed to hijack feminism. And that is something that I think we really need to be very careful about, is the way in which patriarchy is going to constantly try to hijack feminism. That is my worst fear, which is why a lot of university campuses are so happy teaching a course in women's writing. Why are women's writing courses so widely accepted? Because it continues that separation of the sexes. Because you have your separate category for women, so that the general category remains men. Therefore, men as general, women are particular. Classic patriarchy. Nobody notices.
Exactly, sir. Sir, there are some questions here I can see. Probably one or two questions, but people are actually pouring their gratitude. Sir, amazing talk, like it's a brilliant deliberation, everything. So one question is, by I can actually display the question here. Yes, sir, your microphone is on mute.
Yeah, so Ankita, there are several poems of Walt Whitman in his book Leaves of Grass, but the one poem that I would certainly want you to look at is When I Heard at the Close of Day. Look at that poem. I'm going to write it down over here for people to see. When I heard at the close of day. That is one poem that I would want you to look at. The second one is We Two Boys Together, clinging. I hope I've done that right. Yeah, there are many other poems, but I'm just mentioning these two. When I heard at the close of day, and we two boys together clinging. Look at those poems, but there are many, especially in the Calamus section of Leaves of Grass, you are going to find a lot of homoerotic poetry, Ankita. So thank you for your question.
Yes, there is another observation by someone. Just a minute. Yes, she says that I have read, she has read about this recently, this idea of queer and the idea of sodomy in the same-sex love in India by Ruth Vanita and Salim Kidwai. I mean, she doesn't want to have, I don't want to ask any question to you, but this is her observation
Oh, okay.
about sodomy and all. So
Yeah. Well, I don't, I don't think that book is about sodomy. I think that would be a slightly misleading way of putting it. But yeah, so same-sex love in India is an absolutely wonderful magisterial book, which was published in 2000, which deals with the way in which same-sex relationships have existed in Indian literature and culture from the Vedic period. So it's a very important book. And it basically takes you on a roller coaster ride, as it were, from the Vedic period into the 20th century. It's a very important book. Yeah.
and another question, no, just an observation. We don't need workshops on gender sensitizing.
Well, like I said, I
that's
think
how
we do need workshops on gender diversity. We do need workshops on sexual diversity. Gender sensitization, no, because gender sensitization is basically about respect women, worship them as a goddess, and bow down to them. That is not what I'm here for. That is not what feminism says either. Feminism does not want women to be treated as goddesses. Feminism wants women to be treated as human beings. That's the problem. That's the problem that patriarchy doesn't understand.
Yes, sir. So the last question maybe, and this question is by Meghna.
Yes.
And
oh. Well, oh gosh, you people are everywhere. So just to give those people who are not initiated, I suddenly remember someone started singing Amaro Porano Jaha Chai Tumi Tai in the panel discussion. You did. It cracks me up. Because I think it was a very famous actor who was singing that song, who I'm not going to name at the moment. Those who were there at St. Xavier's that awful afternoon will know. But yeah, I mean, it just came across as an incredibly patriarchal song at that point, and the way in which he was singing it was just terrible. So yeah, gosh, Meghna, yeah, it was one of my most the most horrible sessions of moderating a discussion. But very nice to see you, Meghna. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much for joining with us today. I hope in future we can have you for our future endeavors. So thank you so much. Had there been no clocks, no time foundation, I would have listened to you all the nights, all the day long. Sir,
oh dear.
But, yes, sir. I am speaking from the bottom of my heart. Exactly.
Thank you.
What I feel right now. So
thank you
so much. And if you have any other, I mean, kind of thing that you want to share with us, please go ahead. Otherwise,
no. I think I've shared enough. I wish everybody to be sensitive to gender diversity, to sexual diversity, and learn to recognize the queer in you. Happy Pride, and we will meet again very soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, sir. Happy Pride Day. Okay, this is like the end of our 2-day program on the Pride Month. So here I am with the formal vote of thanks thing. So, okay, this is not the end of everything. We are going to organize these kinds of events in future as well. Please be with us. Subscribe to our YouTube channel that we have actually made just yesterday. And apart from that, please subscribe to Linadri sir's channel as well. I mean, you can find lots of information there related to gender studies, related to LGBTQ studies, related to queer studies. Please go ahead and watch. Okay, having said that, we know that end is not everything, it is just a new beginning. So I take this golden opportunity to thank Professor Niladri Chatterjee sir for accepting our invitation and delivering such a beautiful, insightful, and thought-provoking lecture. Thank you so much, sir. I extend the gratitude to all the participants who had presented their papers and who had presented their, talents yesterday through some different kinds of, endeavors, with different kinds of art forms. So I salute them for their effort. Having said that, I would also like to thank Pritesh Chakraborty sir and Anuradha Dosad ma'am for being with us for this 2 day long program, online program on on Pride Month. And last but not the least, I would also like to thank Tanushri Gupta, who has made these beautiful flyers that you can see, these beautiful and colorful flyers. So happy Pride Month, happy Pride Day. Thank you all. Stay tuned and stay safe. Bye. See you soon.